I'm so excited to be joined this evening by two wonderful alums of Rice. Our moderator, Laura Beth Vietor, is a Rice 99 graduate, but now lives outside of Greensboro, North Carolina. Like most of you, she likes reading in her spare time, and that includes lots of genres. She is known on social media as LB the Lover of Books, where she has a large following of other book lovers. She has had the awesome opportunity to virtually interview over 60 debut to best-selling authors, including Anne Napolitano, Bonnie Garmis, Chris Whitaker, Lisa C., Rice grad Melissa Fu, Shelby Van Pelt, William Kent Kruger, and more. The best part is if you missed those live author chats, they're uploaded on her BookTube channel under LB the Lover of Books, where readers have amassed over 14,000 hours watched. If you're interested in attending any of her free Zoom author chats coming up, message her after this event to get the details. She has also had the opportunity to interview authors live, such as Kate Quinn, Karen Slaughter, Kristen Miller, Patty Callahan Henry, and Safia Sinclair. Our author, Elizabeth Crook, is a Rice 82 graduate who now lives in Austin, Texas. She has written 6 novels: The Raven's Bride and Promised Lands, The Night Journal, Monday, which was named a Best Book of the Year by Kirkus Reviews, The Witchway Tree, which is currently in development for film with Panther Dog LLC and Picture House, and The Madstone. Her books have been awarded the Spur Award for Best Long Novel of the West, the Willow Literary Award for Historical Fiction, the Fiction Award from the Philosophical Society of Texas, and the Jesse H. Jones Award for Fiction from the Texas Institute of Letters. The Witchway Tree was named by the Texas Center for the Book at the Texas State Library and Archives Commission as their 2024 Texas Great Read Adult Selection to represent the state's literary landscape at the National Book Festival. In 2023, Elizabeth received the prestigious Texas Writer Award from the Texas Book Festival. Recently, the Texas Cultural Trust selected Elizabeth as one of its 2025 honorees for the Texas Medal of Arts Awards. Before we get started, I'm going to hand it off to another Rice alum, Zachary Foster, to give a short introduction about our collaborator for this event, the Friends of Fondren Library.
Thanks, Emily. I'm Zachary Foster, a board member of Friends of Fondren Library, and I like Rice so much that I graduated twice. Undergrad in 2012, Brown College, and then my MBA in 2022. I've also spent quite a bit of time in Fondren Library, especially during my undergraduate years. Friends of Fondren Library is delighted to co-host tonight's lecture with the Association of Rice Alumni. Friends of Fondren is celebrating its 75th anniversary this academic year. We are a membership organization that provides financial support to Rice University's Fondren Library and presents lectures and events for our members and for the greater Houston community. If you aren't already a member, please consider this your personal invitation to join. Your membership helps fund the library collections and facilities as well. Thank you all for joining for tonight's event. Now on to Laura Beth and Elizabeth.
Great. Thank y'all so much. I was so excited to see all the Rice grads popping in, and hopefully more will join. But thanks for joining tonight, Elizabeth. I'm so happy that you're here. And let me go ahead. She's going to highlight us, I think. And then there we go. But I just want to hop right in because, and people, please put your questions in. If there's a follow-up, I'll just address it right then. But let's just go ahead and get going. Why Texas Westerns? First of all, like, what is your passion towards them, and why Texas Westerns?
Okay, well, first, let me say thanks to everybody that is joining. And Steve Skinner, hi. I mean, we met because of a previous book that I wrote that was reviewed in the Rice, alum paper magazine. And so that's how we know each other, only online. But we've corresponded through Goodreads and so forth. And so I was surprised to hear your presence here, and pleased. And everybody else who's joined, thanks so much. So Texas, yeah. Okay, so I grew up in Texas. And I think the Western influence may come from my brother, who was a little bit older than I was, 3 years older, 2.5 years older. But growing up, he always wanted to watch Westerns on TV. And in our household, there were no rules like you had to take turns. It was whoever was bigger. It was sort of the law of the West. If you were bigger, you had control of the television set. So I would be watching, I Dream of Jeannie or Gilligan's Island or something like that. And suddenly my brother would come in and we would be watching Gunsmoke or The Rifleman. you know, or something else that, you know, some longer movie that had to do with a lot of weaponry and a lot of guys. And so I think I just became very familiar with jumping in and out of, you know, my real life into the past and into that period of time, you know, with that sort of people. And that was, I think, the genesis of my familiarity and my sort of comfort zone with that period. And so my books, not all of them have dealt with that. I mean, the first one takes place in Tennessee and it's mostly political. It's about Sam Houston's first, you know, marriage, which was a disastrous marriage. And that book is very political. It's about why he left Tennessee and ended up in Texas. And then the second one was very Texas oriented. It was Promised Lands, which was, and these were way back in the early 90s, like 1991, 1993. The second one was the Texas Revolution, big fat novel about the Texas Revolution that my mom still thinks is my best book, so, but which very few other people have ever read. So both of those were published by Doubleday. And then that, you know, but that was obviously very Texas oriented. And then I jumped to New Mexico with the Night Journal, which deals with the railroad industry out there and the Harvey houses and the you know, a period of time in the 1880s and kind of a mystery of something that's dug up on, you know, in Pecos in present day that enlightens us about the history in the 1880s. And then back to Texas with Monday, which was but a contemporary period of time, not a Western. It had to do with the shooting from the UT Tower in 1966, and carries on with the characters who were present during that first, you know, tragic school shooting. So and then I went to the, you know, the Which Way Tree and the Madstone, both of which take place during, you know, Civil War and Reconstruction era Texas. And so I was back to Texas. So most of them are settled here because I know the landscape, I know the people, I grew up here, I'm comfortable, you know, in here and then, you know, then there were those little forays into New Mexico and Tennessee. Yeah.
So how do, when you take on a book like this, I know that there's a lot of reference to books that you've read to help you research, but how do you start it and then how do you use it throughout writing?
Okay, so it's a lot of research. It's an awful lot of research. And it is, so I pulled forth a couple of books because a couple of, you know, Zoom things I've done, people have enjoyed seeing this. I have to read about every single segment of the story. So, you know, if it has to do with transportation or it has to do with a certain place. So everything, I really like to try to get it right. I know there are a lot of readers who are comfortable with taking a lot of liberties with the history and just kind of make, you know, fictionalizing, but I like to use the history as the framework that I have to stay within, you know, kind of the scaffolding of the story. And so I try to learn that period of time and that, you know, so you read about, so like Indianola figures in the Madstone in my latest book. And if you hear those noises, that's my dog. He's over here, and if I lock him out, he'll howl at the door. So he's in here. So he's sort of snoring, and I don't know if you can hear him or not. But so this book is Indianola, and it's all just about, you know, there's just one scene, you know, not the major part of the book, but it takes place there. But I had to know about it. So this is really, I mean, it's an interesting book. I read, you know, the whole book. I underline a lot of, you know, a lot of information and make notes in the margins. And then in the back, I write, you know, a lot of notes about things that might be useful to me while I'm, you know, writing. And then I end up the ones that turn out, you know, as I review it, oh, this one is really useful. So I'm going to highlight this one I've already used. So I, you know, will ignore that or whatever. And I do this with any number of books. So like this one is about, you know, Sharp's rifles and Spanish mules. I don't actually know much about weaponry. So I have to do my research and know. And so the back of the book will look like this, you know, and the same thing, the Army in Texas during Reconstruction, you know, a lot of stuff I've got to know. And so the back of the book will look like this. So there are any number of books like this that have, you know, this kind of, you know, notations at the end. This is, you know, Mark Twain's Roughing It, which is a really fascinating book. And and it's fun to do. I mean, the research is like this treasure hunt where you find stuff. You know, like this one is, you know, saddling up anyway. So it's about cattle drives and so forth. And I don't know anything about cattle drives, but I had to know, you know, this stuff. And it's interesting. So, you know, then I can incorporate just little things I find that lend an authenticity to a scene so that it seems like, hopefully seems like the reader is really taking part, you know, and is kind of there in the place. You know, you've got to know the landscape, you've got to know the vegetation, you've got to know, you know, how the people are dealing with the situation that they're in.
Well, you know, you're mentioning the weaponry. I found it fascinating. Jorge's double bear, you know, because that comes into play later, right? So it's just fascinating to learn these things. I probably should have paid attention a little bit better in Texas history in 8th grade, but I was in Puebla. You know, I grew up on the southeast coast, like near Beaumont. So you would think I would have heard of it, but I sort of did a deep dive into it as well. And so how much time do you spend on research before you sit down? And I would say put pen to paper, but it's probably fingers to a typing. What does it look like time wise?
It looks like a lot of years. I mean, you know, it takes me a long time. I mean, for one thing, I'm a very slow reader. So I am not actually, you know, like a well-read person when it comes to fiction. I read a lot growing up. I read a lot as a teenager, but once I started writing, all of my reading time, you know, is spent reading the research. And so even when I'm reading at night, you know, like I had a bit of a panic when you said, okay, at the end, I'm going to ask you to recommend some books. I'm like, I don't have any books anybody's going to want to read. They're all like this, you know? And so, I'm just slow. I read out loud to myself. It's the only way I process what I'm reading, which made it really hard to get through Rice. It made it really hard to get through my history courses at Rice because of that. So, you know, I spend a lot of years getting through a bunch of books. I mean, they're just stacked everywhere in my office and in my home. And I try to be thorough. I try not to make mistakes, you know, with history, but it's a lot of reading. So, then I start, you know, writing with a lot of misgivings, and with each scene I have to fill in. So say, you know, say my people are traveling and they, you know, reach San Antonio and it's 1868. So I've read a lot about 1868, but I really have to know about the Meagher Hotel in San Antonio. So I have to read another book about the Meagher Hotel, or, you know, just about San Antonio, you know, the history of San Antonio. So at each step along the way in a story, there's more reading and more information that I need to get that I didn't get in the beginning when I was just sort of getting ideas for the story and laying out the plot, you know, the story.
Well, Larry brings up a really good point. I'm going to go straight into this one because the Madstone does not have chapters. And it's the first time he's ever seen it. I've seen it some, but he thought that it read more like a E. Cummings poem. So can you tell us a little bit about your thought process there and why you chose that method, that format?
Okay, so it's a letter, you know, that Benjamin is writing, and he would not, I tried to make it authentic where he would not have done chapters. He just, you know, that would not be, I do wish it's really my one regret about this book that we had bigger space between the sections. There are sections, or that I had said in the beginning that Benjamin intended to lay out sort of the map, the path that they take, and said at the beginning of each section, you know, from Sutherland Springs, you know, to the next stop in this journey that my characters take. I wish I had delineated better because I do think people struggle with the idea of a long narrative. Now, it does have spaces where you have sections, but there's only like 2 or 3 blank lines in between. And, you know, when the my British publisher was doing the British edition, I said, if you can change anything, you know, put more space between those sections, because I think people struggle with, as a reader, I think it's off-putting to see a big block of, text without these significant breaks. Because I know when I'm reading, I look for, okay, do I have time to read to the next chapter? Do I have time, And, if you're looking at this book, you can tell there's a break, there are breaks just as if it were labeled as a chapter, but there's no title to it. There's no chapter number. There's no anything that shows it as a break. There's just a couple of spaces. So I laid it out that way because I thought that's the way my character would lay it out. He's not writing this as a book. He's writing this as a letter.
So did the British publisher take your advice and make those changes for you?
I think it was too late, no, I mean, and I love their edition. I absolutely adore their cover design. But it was, the book looks just the same in the inside as it did in the little brown edition.
Well, give us some inside scoop, because it'll turn into a paperback. So can you make those suggestions when it moves? Because sometimes there's new elements, people will add in things, like you could do the map, like a journey from here to here.
Right.
Those breaking points. Do you think that's something that you might try to
I doubt they'll do it. I mean, because it costs them to reformat and do everything. I mean, when they do the paperback, they can just run it I don't understand exactly how it's done, but they can just run it the same way they have it, in the hardback without having to go back and make, I think there might be some books they would do that with. I don't know, but I think this would just get run the exact same way as it is in the paperback, and that's the easiest, and probably least expensive way to do it,
So the title is The Madstone. Was it always The Madstone? Did you choose that? Did the publisher?
Right.
How did that come to be?
I loved the title, and I was halfway through the book and came across Madstones, and I thought, okay, I really want this title. And it's not the essential thing in the book, but there's enough of it to make it sort of a symbolic thing in the book. And because Benjamin himself is kind of this touchstone, this Madstone, this fixer, and so I didn't tell my editor I was doing a sequel to the Which Way Tree, and it's not a sequel, it's a standalone book. Both those books can be read separately, but it does carry on with the same character, Benjamin, on another adventure from the one he's on in the Which Way Tree. And he's 2 years older, and I gave him in the Madstone a love story, and in the Which Way Tree, he's just 17, and there's not that element to it. So I liked that title so much. And so finally, when I told my editor I actually had a book, another one, and I said, well, I don't want to go into it now, but, it's going to be sent to you by my agent, and the title is The Madstone. And he wrote back and said, I love this title. I said, well, that's 2 words we won't need to argue about during the editing process. Yeah. And so yeah, he was happy with it, and I was, and there's something very magical about it. And Madstones were these, supposedly kind of medicinal stones that were essentially gallstones that came out of the bellies of deer. Mostly any kind of ruminant animal could produce a Madstone, but they were considered curative for rabies. And I mean, the death from rabies, when you read about people who died from rabies back in the day, it is so hideous. And, children who, I mean, they were smothered to death. They were, I mean, usually adults just had themselves killed. I mean, you would, because you go raving mad, it's terribly painful. And you have to be put out of your misery. There is no cure. And so Madstones were all you had in the way of hope, and hope was all you had in the way of cure. And so there were enough times these stones, if somebody shot a deer, and particularly an albino deer was considered very, very powerful, for a Madstone, and they had a Madstone in the belly, these things were passed down from generation to generation. They were kept locked up in churches, for safekeeping and in various other places so that people in the city could use them or in the town could use them, but that they wouldn't be stolen or disappear. And they came from Europe. I mean, people brought them from Europe, with them. And, it was thought that if you applied it to the wound, it would draw out the toxins, the poisons, and there were enough times when maybe the animal wasn't rabid or the bite wasn't deep enough to penetrate, and for the poison to get in, that they seemed to be curative. And because there were enough times that they seemed to be curative, the belief in them continued. And in fact, when I was writing when I first, sort of posted on Facebook about this book, somebody wrote and contacted me through the little, contact on Facebook and said, my family has a Madstone, and he lived in my hometown, San Marcos. And I thought, that's really cool. And so later, when I was doing an event at the Whitliff Collections in San Marcos, which is a great collection for writers and photographers, and they said, do you have a Madstone we could use on display when you do your presentation here? And I said, no, I've never even seen one. And, but there was somebody on Facebook. Let me see if I could find him. Well, I couldn't find him. I went back through all my, messages. I could not find him. And then when I did a book signing at Book People here in Austin, one of the people that came through the line was this guy. He said, I'm the guy who contacted you. I have a Madstone. I said, can we borrow it? So we had it on display at the Whitliff. He said, it's in a bank. It's in a box. And apparently there was some disagreement in the family about to whom it would belong. And but they got it out, and we had it, on display. It was very cool.
What a cool show and tell. I do find it also intriguing that just because it's not a common term, it's not a common object. So it has some magic about it anyways. But I do also agree. I mean, Benjamin is his own form of a Madstone, and he is such a comfort and a solution and all these things, a belief for these people, especially for Nell and for Henry. There has been a lot of talk about Benjamin in the chat box, but I also want to bring up why Benjamin Franklin. And did that come about after you've named this character, or did you know all along that there were going to be these connections?
The reason he's reading, or has read Benjamin's autobiography is because at the end of The Witch-Way Tree, the previous book that deals with my character, Benjamin Shreve, he's given a gift of some books by a judge to whom he's been testifying about these murders. And one of the books is the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. So here he is 2 years older, and I had to age him up a little bit in his voice and his sort of, outlook on life. He's a little more savvy. He's, more of a hard bargainer. He's learned how to get along a little better. He's 19 now. He's been on his own for quite a while. And so, and he is a little better read and a slight bit better spoken, even though his grammar still is not perfect. So, I brought in that book simply because that was a book I knew he had read, given the end of The Witch-Way Tree.
Okay. How do you do that? Like how they're speaking, is that also highly researched? Because there's a certain way that he speaks and, his, I don't know, everybody really, to make it seem so authentic.
Yeah. So, I just read a whole lot from that period, about, from people who have written memoirs or letters during that period. And so you get this sense of the rhythm of speech. And, a lot of these people were uneducated formally, but they were really eloquent in spoken speech and storytelling. And most of them had read the Bible, which has a certain kind of poetic quality to the language. And so, there are just books and memoirs. There's one in particular that I found where the writing was just riveting to me because it was very poetic. And so Benjamin has this nice lyricism. It has to do with the number of beats per sentence. I mean, because since I read aloud to process, I also write aloud. So anytime I'm writing an email, writing anything, I am saying it. And if it hits me wrong, you know, in how many beats it's got in it or something. And then when I go through drafts, I reread every, you know, I'm reading it aloud and I hear the sound of it as much as I see the meaning of it. And so, and that has to be right to the ear. And so I don't know, you know, if you ask me to speak like Benjamin, to say something like Benjamin would say it, I would not be able to do that. But if I had my fingers on the keys, I could write it, you know, so it's a different skill. It kind of gets in your head. I don't read anything other that's written in first person as far as fiction, because that voice might mess up the one I have for Benjamin in my head, you know. And so I try only to read, you know, authentic books from that period that, you know, that would have the correct language, not somebody else's rendition of that period speak.
You just answered Gail's question beautifully. I'm going to go ahead and say her comments, though. She said the narrator voice in the Madstone is amazing. I can hear people I grew up with as a child. So I think that that was just a great compliment, and I agreed. And I want to go back to the actual narrator of the audiobook. Did you listen to that, or did you have a choice in that? Because that was also, I thought he did an excellent job.
You ask really great questions, Laura Beth. Thank you. Yeah, so when they told me they were going to do an audiobook, you know, I of course was curious because Benjamin's voice is important to me because he's narrating the whole book. And so I said, you know, can I listen to who this person will be that's reading it? And they said, well, you know, it's not usually done, but yeah, you know, okay. So they did some auditions, 3, and they let me listen to 3. And the first person was very Southern in the way he read, which for Texans is all wrong. I mean, you know, we come down hard on our R's. You know, we don't have that soft, whatever it is, which is lovely in the South, but it's not the way Texans speak. And so this person was all wrong. And the next person was really peppy. And that was so wrong for Benjamin, because Benjamin is he's just very dutiful in the way he's telling the story. And he's very earnest, and he's funny because he doesn't know he's funny. He's not trying to be funny. He's not trying to be entertaining. He's just, you know, laying down the facts as he sees them. So I thought, no. And then the third person really was great. And, you know, so I knew he was the one, but he kind of chuckled at something he read that Benjamin had said that was funny. So I said, well, can I talk to him? And they said, well, that's unusual. We'll see if he's willing to talk to you. So, you know, they got back with me and said, he's very willing to talk to you. So, you know, I said, here's the thing. Benjamin is funny because he doesn't know he's funny. And he doesn't know, he's not trying to entertain. He, you know, like this guy read The Which Way Tree also. And this conversation took place before The Which Way Tree. And so I said, if you kind of chuckle when you read it, you know, he then is aware of entertaining, and that's not his goal. And this guy just got it. Will Collier's his name. And, you know, he said, yes, you know, this is, I get this. And he said, how would you read it? So I said, well, here's how I hear it. I read him a few sentences, and he said, well, I'm an actor. And so I usually put a little more emphasis. I said, please do, you know, whatever magic you bring to it is great. But you know, just know that my feeling for him is that he's very earnest kid. And so he just did a beautiful job. And the only thing I heard back after The Which Way Tree was that he had mispronounced pecan. He had done the pecan or whatever. So when I, you know, when they were going to do the Madstone, I said, can we still have Will do the reading? Because he was so great. And they said yes. And I said, okay. So I emailed him and I said, listen, we just need to talk about pecan. And you know, I said it's like Puh, and then like con, like a con man. And so he said, got it. And also I said Medina. He had apparently said Medina. There was one that went, but everything else was perfect. And then because I said there are a lot of pecans in, you know, the Madstone. There's several mentions of pecans. And so anyway, I obviously don't listen to my own books once they're read, but nobody has come to me and said anything that was mispronounced in the Madstone. So I'm really happy about that.
Well,
He's
Mary
great.
agreed. She said she enjoyed the audiobook as well. And I want to talk about Steve's comment because he said, I found both the voices, and I don't know that he necessarily means the audiobook. I think he's talking more about the character's voice, and both in the Which Way Tree and the Madstone were much the art, or in quotes, or the magic or the animating, compelling aspect of the books. And I agree, it did have a very much a lyricism about it. And I mean, I can't tell you how many things I highlighted. I mean, it's unbelievable. Just that he was so wise beyond his years, but so unassuming. I mean, it's great.
I love him as a character, and that's why, I mean, the Madstone really came from the Which Way Tree, because when I finished that book, I, you know, just missed, you know, his company. I mean, you're spending all day, every day with these characters, and you know, so now and then you just, you know, I mean, he was one I just didn't want to let go of. And I've never written a sort of a sequel to anything before, but on this one, I just felt like, oh, he needed another story. And so that's why I wrote the Madstone, was just because of you know, being kind of attached. I mean, it's a strange thing when you finish a book, because you know, you're living all day with these people. You know, you're having your coffee with them in the morning, you're having your drink with them at night, whatever. And they're in your head all day, and then it's a world completely apart from your real life, and nobody in your real life, you know. I have one friend that I always confide in who sees my stuff while I'm writing it, Stephen Harrigan, who's a terrific writer. And so he sort of knows this world and these people, but otherwise you're in it with them alone. And there's a real intimacy in determining every move a character makes, every word they speak. I mean, you're pulling all those strings. And then at the end, you stop pulling the strings, and you never, you know, they're done, you know, they're gone and they're over. And it's a strange sense of you know, loss, I guess. And you know, I mean, it's one reason I like talking to people like you or groups like this, because you know, it brings those people back, and it feels like, okay, they're still out there in the world, they're still meeting new people, they're still wandering around in a way, and not just finished, you know. And so yeah, I mean, I don't remember what your question was, but
Well, I'm just going to keep going with it because I love this conversation, because your grief of letting go of the characters mimics so much of what Benjamin's going through as he heads back to comfort, which I also find very ironic, right? Because he is just bereft. And were you able to channel your own emotion with that regard into these characters? Because you were feeling quite the same, knowing that you're about to let them go as well the second time.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think at every turn, you are, you know, you are inhabiting your characters in some way, and you know, sort of needing to feel what they're feeling, you know. And so yeah, I mean, I really ached for Benjamin, you know, in that farewell, and for the little boy Tot Henry, you know, and for Nell. I mean, because you know, there's just a finality. I mean, and you know, I think in today's age, we don't often feel the same kind of finality except with death, because people keep up through social media, people keep up with, you know, through the telephone. In those days, farewells were really goodbyes, you know, and there was a sense in which people had to get used to that kind of departure. that kind of finality in a way that, that we struggle with, I think, today.
Yeah. I think that you seem to hold your cards a little bit close when talking about what's coming up. But Steve, and especially I, want to know, is this the last we've heard of Benjamin? Because, I mean, he wants to do a cattle drive. I mean, like, there's still adventure to add.
Yeah. The truth is, I don't know. I mean, it's been a year. I mean, this book came out a year ago, and I should be well on my way to knowing what's next and what I'm going to write. It's hard for me to know whether, like, when I think of going on with Benjamin, because that's a question that always comes up. A lot of people have asked me because he's a very lovable character. But if you write a third in a series, even if it's a standalone, it has to draw somehow from the first ones. And you have to assume lots and lots and lots of people have read those first ones to buy the third one. And when you write a book, you have to assume there are going to be plenty of sales, because the book industry, like any other industry, works, on demand. So I have to factor all that in, and then I have to think about, like, how many readers and all of that. And I've never written for a specific audience or I just decide what I want to write. I write it. I hope I can sell it, and then, hope people will read it and like it. And so far I've been lucky with 6, but you never know. And it's a changing industry. And so I don't know. And I don't know whether I would bring him back at what age, because if he's much older, he has a whole different sensibility about life. If I go 2 years later, I could do a cattle drive, but who really wants to compete with Larry McMurtry, So I don't know. My dog is snoring really loudly now, so I'm just telling you. Okay, you can't hear it. So I don't know about that. I really am interested in the border during that period of time. There was a lot that was going on that was very interesting in the late 1860s, early 1870s, and even up through the 90s. There's just a lot of stuff going on the border that's interesting. And so I could bring him in there, because in the Which Way Tree, that's where he ends up, in Zavala County, with a cattle ranch. And so, we know in the Which Way Tree that he ends up happy, with a big family and a cattle ranch, there on the border. So I can bring him in anytime in that period up through, 1925. And just trying to decide which, I've had a hard time even knowing what to read in order to inform my decision. So the answer is that I don't have any more idea than you do whether or not there will be a third book about Benjamin. But I can't imagine it being, there's nothing else that's just drawing me. I know all these writers that are like, oh, I have so many ideas, I don't know which one to do. I have never been that writer. I always have one idea, and then I just, follow it like a little, hound dog down the path.
Well, Kathy wants to know, do these characters keep moving within your head though? Like, does Benjamin, is he still there in comfort after, just having mailed the letter to Tot, or does that just keep going in your head?
Because I'm trying to think of a third story, and whether I would do a third story, they do. You think, okay, what's he doing 2 years from now? What's he doing 4 years from now? What's he doing in his 70s? And do I want to reunite him with his sister, his long lost sister, Samantha, who is the sort of the main character in the Which Way Tree in the first book? Does she ever come back? And if she comes back, it has to be when he's much older, like in his 70s, because at the end of the Which Way Tree, she's not back. So, they do keep playing in that way. Dickie keeps coming back, because he's just fun. And so, if I wrote a third, Dickie would probably be in it. And unless I made it so much later, because Dickie was older, he might not be able to be in it. So, it is, they normally wouldn't, in a way, like with Monday, which was the story that begins in 1966 and carries with these characters through their lives several decades later. they just stopped in my mind. That was the end of that story. And I never thought of doing a sequel. I loved that book. I'm very proud of that book. But it was an all-encompassing story, and you felt that the end was the end. But with this one, you know, I don't really feel that the end is the end because Benjamin is so young. And he had so many plans, you know, in the course of this story.
Well, we're going to keep wishing that more comes, and I hope that you have that, find that confidence and that reassurance, and it will continue. Because for me, I know no one wants to go up against Larry McMurtry. Don't get me wrong, I grew up with Lonesome Dove in
Yes.
the house, on the shelf, and on the TV, and on rewind. So I'm right there with you. But this book also read for me in my head like a series. Have you had any conversations to make this into, because I mean, I feel like it's right, because I mean, Lonesome Dove was in the 80s, and you know, we're always kind of coming back to this, and Yellowstone's big. Like, I don't know, I just feel like you need to be talking to some TV.
Well, we are trying to get the Which Way Tree made into a movie.
Okay.
That may actually happen. I mean, we have some promising things going on with it. I don't know whether it happen. It would be an expensive movie. And so, you know, there is that element. People do, I think Westerns now, or any, you know, period piece from here, there's a certain nostalgia that we have for the day when things, I mean, when life was harder but simpler. In a way. I mean, you know, it's so complicated now, and there's so much coming at us from so many different directions and so many ways to process information. And it's very complicated. And back in the day, you know, it was harder but simpler. I mean, you know, you had to make a living on a farm, or you had to, you know, and I mean, there just wasn't as much chaos in your life. And so even though the hardships might have been more difficult, the decision making, you were just closer to the ground. You were closer to the, you know, just to the nuts and bolts of how to get through life. And so I think people, to some extent, I know I get drawn to that period of time because of that element of it being, you know, it's about what's over the next hill. You know, I mean, is there something scary over the next hill, or is the horizon really, really nice over there? And today, you know, we don't. There's an uncertainty and a chaotic element that I think is you know, kind of alarming and disarming, and makes us want to go back to that time. So yes, that's one reason, sort of, to go back to your first question, the Western element.
Yeah. I mean, I think you just described why Little House on the Prairie stayed on for so long, and that news, you know, the front runner to Yellowstone 1883 was also very much successful because it has all those elements. I do think that we have people that want to ask live questions. So if you do, I think they're going to turn on cameras and allow you to ask your question to Elizabeth. While you're getting that ready, Emily, I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions though, Elizabeth. Are you ready? All right. Okay. Are you an optimist or a pessimist?
Optimist. Sand
and salt water or dry air and land?
Oh, wow. I mean, I'm most comfortable on dry air and land. Sand and salt water, though, my grandparents lived in Corpus Christi, and so I spent a lot of time at Padre Island. And yeah, okay, but land.
Okay. Who is your Dickie, your oddest friend?
My oddest friend. Oh, gosh. I don't know. I mean, I
Maybe
I grew up in San Marcos, Texas. Okay, so I have many odd friends whom I adore, and great storytellers. But I don't think I could name one.
no worries. Powerful conscience or a stronger heart?
Oh, I have a very powerful conscience. It's a painful thing to carry.
Do you write in a diary or letters?
I write emails that become letters to friends.
Do you enjoy research or writing more?
Research.
What is the most interesting fact you learned along the way during your research for the Madstone?
Oh, the history of the Black Seminoles. I did not know anything about them, and that was, my character, Jorge.
Mhm.
I just took a deep dive into their history, and so learned many facts. But that was that was the most enlightening thing. The other thing was that I had grown up in Texas and taken Texas history and done all that. You said 8th grade. For me, it was 7th grade. In San Marcos, it was taught in 7th grade by Mr. Price, and who was lovely. But I did not know anything about the Reconstruction era or about these gangs of people that, like the Swamp Fox gang that figures in the Madstone, that just basically were there to torment Blacks that had been freed, and to torment the federal law enforcement that came down to enforce the new laws. I was completely blindsided by the whole story of that part of our history.
Yeah, I agree. I don't remember it in mine, and it may have been 7th grade as well. But yeah, I think a lot of things were just skipped or not discussed. So I'm so glad that you are bringing this up, which also makes me wonder if maybe Jorge doesn't get his own story headed to Las Bahamas, because he's such an interesting character as well. Or even, his prequel, because how much he has lived. It's just, these characters are too good to drop, is my point. Like, I just love these.
I had essentially written his prequel into this book, and it made everything too long. I mean, because I got so interested, and then I was told I had to cut a good bit of it because it kind of veered off. There's one point where, where he tells his history, and I knew it was too long. I knew it was going to be cut, but I just couldn't resist writing it. And sure enough, and my friend, Steve Harrigan said, Ben, my editor, Ben George, is going to ask you to cut some of this. And I said, well, let's see, and then sure enough, yeah, some of it had to go because, it was like a story in itself. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be a novella you give us. Like, that'd be a nice little treat. No, it's it really, really phenomenal characters. And I fell in love with them, and didn't I don't read too many books without quotation marks. Like, but this was one I just kept going and kept going. And I also like those stops, but for me, it just continued very easily. So phenomenal job.
Thank you.
Wanted to see if anybody has any live questions they want to ask. I think there may be a couple more in the chat box that yeah, somebody said please publish the cut portion as a short story. There's some agreement there. Someone wondered why you left so much mystery surrounding Benjamin's sister's whereabouts. That was sort of still up in the air, and maybe that's something more to come. I don't know.
Well, the whole first book, The Which Way Tree, is about her and her adventure and her departure. And so, I have that option of bringing her back. Although at the end of that book, she had not returned, and Benjamin is already in his 70s. And so if I bring her back, then I'll be writing a book in the 1920s.
Okay.
So, but I kind of like that she's gone. I mean, I kind of like that we don't, I kind of like, leaving. With a book, I don't want to wrap everything up so tightly that you don't think about it afterwards. I mean, I don't like to leave the reader hanging because I can't come up with a satisfying ending myself or anything. It has to feel satisfying, but I think it also, if you want your readers still to continue to think about the book and have it be part of their reading experience instead of just something that's finished. you need to have something thoughtful left, and Samantha is, you wonder.
Well, yeah, and I think it's probably more authentic to the story that she didn't survive. And I mean, think of what the life expectancy was of most people anyway. Like in her case, my guess is it was even shorter with all her disabilities. I think we have some questions, some people. Emily, do you have some that you want to highlight to ask? As Gail or Kathy or Heather?
I'm trying to turn my camera on. Okay, yeah, this is Gail. Hi.
Hi, Gail.
I had a couple of questions. The first one had to be, when you were writing this, did you start out writing it in your own voice and then translate it to Benjamin, or did it kind of come out as Benjamin?
Absolutely came out as Benjamin, and that was the joy of writing his story, is that it just rolls out, and and also, I mean, I honestly am not very good with punctuations. So this was so nice not to have to worry about commas. I mean, their commas are in there, but they're in there with his spoken voice. They're in there where he would naturally place them for a pause, rather than where the Chicago Manual of Style would tell you it need to go. So it relieved me of a lot of, having to sort things out, and I could just write in a spoken voice, which was a lot of fun. And so easy. I'd never written in first person before. And why a teenage boy in the 1860s, why that voice would come to me so easily, I have no idea. But it did, and I enjoyed sort of inhabiting his brain and his speech.
And how much of the story did you have plotted out, and how many things did you kind of discover as you were telling the story?
Many things I discovered along the way. I mean, I am not a good person to plot, and I usually get to the end of the chapter and think, what's going to happen? Something's got to happen. Here they are in this situation, fortunately, like Steve Harrigan's a good brainstormer when I'm really stuck. But usually what I try to do is just think, okay, here's this situation. I know my characters. What would they realistically do? What would they authentically do? I don't want to shove them into a pre-made plot line, that I've come up with. I want to see how they're going to react to this situation. And so it gives the story, it makes it unnerving to write that way, because you don't know what's going to happen next. But it also gives an authenticity to the story, because you're allowing the characters and who you've made them to be react in their, in their very authentic way.
Very good questions, Gail. And Angelica has one in the chat box. How did you come up with the name Tot?
My great-grandfather was called Tot growing up, and he grew up in Zavala County, and lived a good portion of his life in Mexico, running the as the engineer down in the Peñoles mining company in Mapimí, Mexico. Was down there when Pancho Villa came through. He knew Pancho Villa, and he was called Tot. He was always called Tot, and so I don't know. I just thought that was a way to signify Tot's age and everything else in the beginning. And then he just sort of never becomes called Henry throughout.
I appreciate it. All right. I think we are going to try to take a group photo. So if everybody can accept that panelist request, then your camera can come on. And I think this would be a great thing for the Fondren, Friends of Fondren to have, as well as the alumni, as well as for Elizabeth for social media, because I do want more people getting their hands on this book. It's phenomenal. I can't wait to go back. This is my first of yours. It will not be my last. And I'm sure other people on this call, it's the same. Like it's really fantastic. And congratulations on all your awards too. I mean, it's not only us praising you, like you're getting some acclimate. It's just congratulations.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. And yeah, I'm pleased with those awards. I mean, it's nice. It's been a long career. I mean, I started writing in the, so anyway, I'm happy with those. Yeah.
Well, all right, everybody. There's a couple of people that aren't seeing the invite, Emily. Has it gone out? Okay.
I'm about halfway through everyone. So you
Okay.
should, if you haven't gotten it yet, you should be getting it within the next minute.
All right, sounds great. I'm gonna, while we're waiting, I'm gonna read a line from this because I'm just gonna read it because I think it's beautiful. And this comes obviously from Benjamin's voice. And so on we traveled in that fashion, encountering no one to ask for water in the dark of night, and smelling of birth and death and our own sweat, whilst the air around us smelled of spring flowers and the moon crossed over the sky. Coyotes yipped far off in the regions we could not see. The land was flat and the road less ragged than those I had traveled back home in the hills, but there was a rough unevenness to the time and to my feelings. Despite we had won victories in the passage of that day, I felt profoundly lost in the course of the night. I just like got chills when I read that. Like I loved that passage.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah.
I thought it was a good filler while we wait on people to get their invitations in, but just little things like that. I mean, when you talk about the vultures, you know, waiting to, oh, what was it? Something about waiting for God. Oh, anyways, it's so good.
They await the will of God. Yeah.
Yes, waiting for the will of God. There we go.
Yeah. Waiting. Yeah. But then they decide to go ahead and dive in. I mean, you know, that violent scene, I had so much fun writing because the victims, of course, are such horrible people. And so I just made it worse and worse for them and laughed the whole time I was writing it. I mean, it's just, you know, it's really gruesome. And it all happens so fast, you know. But they get their due, you know, they deserve what happens. So
Thank you everybody for joining us tonight. This has been an absolutely
thanks, y'all.
and just wish you the best, Elizabeth. I know those ideas are going to come and we will be ready to support you as Rice alums, but also as readers.